Women's sport has come a long way. There is more visibility, more money, stadiums are filling up, and millions are watching. But the playing field is still not equal. Sexism remains a huge issue. So what will it take to finally achieve real respect in sports? I'm Stefanie Dekker, and this is The Stream.
Sports are a microcosm of society. That's what Billie Jean King always says, and it's so true. Not only are female athletes not getting the respect and pay they deserve, that happens everywhere. That happens in business, that happens in education. This is a whole societal thing.
Would you believe that? She says she can take the pressure and play for the money as well as I can. The male is king, the male is supreme, and the women should know that.
Dude, what is he saying?
I think it's funny when you add a little bit of money to a sport and you give some girls attention, what they can do with it. I think everyone should take a page out of our book and really put some more time and effort into women's everything.
Now imagine that you've trained your entire life to reach the top of your game, your sport, and then you're asked by the press about your looks instead of your skills. Well, for many female athletes, this is the reality. Their sports clubs are underfunded, athletes are underpaid, women face misogynistic comments, and sometimes actual sexual assault. So, why are female athletes still fighting for basic recognition and respect? Well, to discuss more, I am joined by Bellew. She is the head of communications at Women in Sport Foundation, and she joins us from London. And we have Usher Komugisha. She's a sports journalist and a former athlete, mentoring young men and women, and she joins us from Kampala in Uganda. Thank you very much for joining us, ladies, on such an important topic. Sarah, I'm going to start with you because you look at the numbers, you look at research. How would you describe the state of female sports globally? Are we at a turning point, or is it still lagging far behind?
Well, I'd like to think we were at a turning point. And of course, we've seen so much visibility, particularly, I mean, I'm based in the UK at the moment, but this summer we've had the Women's Euros, and we're currently seeing the Women's Rugby World Cup play out to mostly sell-out stadiums and millions of people around the world. So, you know, certainly that visibility is increasing. But look, we have to look backwards, I think, to understand the situation and the current environment that we're in at the moment. You know, it's not an accident that women have been excluded from sport. You know, for centuries, sport has been a preserve of men. It was designed for men, by men, and still is predominantly run by men. And we look back to the historic exclusion of women. Look at football, for example. You know, women in the UK were banned for 50 years, from 1921 to 1971. It was a sport that at the time the authorities said was quite unsuitable for females. And it's not just football. We've seen it in cricket as well. You know, women were banned for Lords for decades. We weren't allowed to become members of the MCC until 1998. And the year our charity was founded in 1984 was the first time that women were allowed to run the Olympic marathon, 88 years after men were allowed to run it. So, you know, this is the problem, you know, decades of entrenched misogyny that we're still having to unpick today.
Before we move on, there's an argument that women athletes make less money because there's less interest in women's sports in general. But is that really the case?
Women's sports receive only 4% of all sports media coverage. You might hear the argument, well, nobody cares about women's sports. There's less viewership. Wrong. There are viewers. Bianca Andreescu, her match against Serena Williams in 2019 was TSN's biggest tennis broadcast ever. It set records. And 47% of the population of the UK watched the Women's World Cup. You might hear the argument, well, women's skill level is less than men. But studies show women actually beat men in endurance sports. In the 2003 Boston Marathon, women's speeds were on average 5 minutes faster than men's. Further studies show gender biases determine whose athleticism is honed and whose is ignored. Researchers watching kids t-ball noticed that coaches would step in to fix the boys' swing, but not the girls.
Usher, you're a sports commentator. You follow things very, very closely. Describe to us when it comes to the figures. People are watching, right? Millions are watching. It is bringing in money. How would you describe it?
I'll tell you that in the world right now, people are following women's sports in general. In Africa, this summer we had the Women's Africa Cup of Nations back-to-back in Morocco. We could see, thousands of fans coming out to watch all of the games, and really also, especially the games that involve the hosts Morocco. And the stadium where the games happened for Morocco was right next to the Olympic Stadium that will host a couple of the games that will be at the 2030 World Cup, when Morocco co-hosts the FIFA World Cup with Spain and Portugal. So with that, you could see a lot of enthusiasm. You could see some of the players in Morocco being looked for by fans to exchange jerseys, to get autographs. Players like Ghislaine Shebak, the captain, Fatma Tagnaout. In the last 5 years, they've become household names. But also across the African continent, we've seen more involvement, especially with the rise of social media. You see so many of the fans, football fans, because all they want is just to watch football. But also away from the African continent, we can talk European football. You could see this weekend or last weekend that the game between Bayer Leverkusen and Bayern Munich had a great attendance, 30,000 fans, which was a record in Germany. We saw that save, of course, from the goalkeeper at the Women's Euros, which probably is one of the reasons why people are saying, okay, wow, you know what, we could actually follow women's football even away from the Women's Euros. And that has been the challenge for people to know where to watch women's football or women's sports in general, away from the major competitions like the Olympics or away from the World Cup. But also across the pond, obviously, in the USA, we've seen record numbers, sellout crowds happening in the WNBA. We've seen also a league called Unrivaled that has been set up by a couple of the players who play in the WNBA. The numbers are through the roof. You're talking about 11.9 million viewers across the board of this competition that is not necessarily as big as the WNBA, but it's bringing out numbers. So some of these things we have to really talk about. And also recently we saw Michelle Wang obviously take up the reins at London City Lionesses, the first team that we've seen in the WSL, owned away from having a men's counterpart team. And all she said was, all women's sports needs is investment. And we can see what that means. You saw what the matchup against Arsenal eventually led to, and what that could mean in terms of the rest of the season.
It's interesting picking up on what you said there about where to watch female sports other than the huge games. That brings me to a clip I want to play. Former football player Haley Rosen argues that the bottom line of this issue of not treating women's sports like men comes down to one thing. Listen to this.
The biggest issue in women's sports is one we rarely talk about: marketing. We have a major marketing problem. The issue is this: we do not treat women's sports like sports. We treat them like a charity. This mindset is so pervasive that it can be hard to even notice. But how many of you have heard someone say that we need to support women's sports? Have you ever heard someone say that we need to support the NBA or NFL? Of course not. It sounds absurd.
Sarah, I saw you smiling at that. What is your reaction to that? It does sound absurd. Let's all get behind the NBA, or let's get behind, the World Cup, the Men World Cup. Let's go support it. It just doesn't happen, right? Why is it that we're talking about that context when it comes to women?
Well, I think when we look, we were talking, weren't we, just now about the TV audiences, and we've got to remember that we haven't seen women's sport, aside from the Olympics every 4 years and tennis every summer. For women's sport, it has so rarely been seen on free-to-air television. Look, when we look back, snooker was played in black and white before we saw netball on our screen. So is it any wonder that women's sports is having to really market to grow an audience? And, you know, there is an audience there. It's absolutely absurd that there isn't. And we're seeing that now. You know, now we're seeing the moment that women's sports is becoming more visible, there is a clearly defined audience for it. And what's so interesting about the audiences that we're seeing is they are far more diverse. You know, just last week I heard, you know, from a colleague of mine who had funny enough, a male delivery driver deliver his groceries to his door. And he was starting to talk about watching women play rugby. Having not been a rugby fan, he says, I am absolutely loving the Women's Rugby World Cup. And so we are seeing, and you know, you've got to remember as well that women in the majority of households hold the purse strings. So it's just business sense to be investing in women's sport and getting behind women's sports. You know, this is going to continue to grow, and we're seeing that upward trajectory, and that's where it should be.
Usher, I want to step away from your job for a second. You used to be an athlete. You are a woman. What have you faced in your job, and also when you were an athlete, when it comes to, you know, the challenges perhaps that you have more than men would have had? And also briefly on the back of that, as a follow-up, are women and men treated differently in press conferences by journalists?
Well, it is a very good question, Stefanie, I can tell you. I remember, I was raised with a very confident outlook at life in general. And I can say that when you go to the park, maybe to play, you know, football, or you go to the court to play basketball, you're definitely always going to find more boys than girls. But the thing is, you have to usually, you know, stand up to them. And I remember this summer speaking to so many female footballers, obviously at the Women's Africa Cup of Nations in Morocco, and all of them literally had the same story. When did you start playing football? I started playing football with the boys in the neighborhood, that kind of thing. But it means that they had to be confident in themselves to say that I belong here, and no one is going to bully me out of just being a girl and not a boy in terms of wanting to play the game. But speaking of experiences, I think there's been a tremendous improvement when it comes to how people generally look at female journalists in football stadiums, whether they are working as journalists, as media, or as officers, administrators. There's really been a general change, and now people are learning that it has nothing to do with your gender. Can you do the job? Can you deliver? Because when you say a woman can play football, of course it means she can talk about football. And even if a woman did not play football in the Premier League, she can still be a journalist. We're talking about a game that has rules that we can read online, or we can study about football and ask people about football. You don't have to have played, you know, at a World Cup for you to talk about football. So I think that for me, there's a lot of work that has been done, especially from people already existing and working in the industry. And this is going to help those that are coming behind us.
All right, well, I want to touch on a very large issue when it comes to women in general, but also in sports, and that's sexism. The frequency is shocking. A BBC survey found that 65% of elite sportswomen suffered sexism in their field. However, the same survey interestingly shows that only 10% of them felt comfortable to report it. Now, it's not just random fans, it's much more institutionalized than that. The Matildas, they're Australia's women's national football team, and in February, radio show host Marty Sheargold made offensive on-air comments. The incident sparked a huge online backlash. He was forced to apologise and he got fired. Listen to this.
Okay, it's been a nightmare tournament for the Matildas over the last 3 or 4 days over in the US.
You know what they remind me of? Year 10 girls. Now, I'm sorry to undermine the whole sport, but that's what I think of it, so you can stick it up.
So we're playing in the She Believes Cup.
Oh, she believes in what? It better be men.
We're 12 months out from Australia hosting the Women's Asian Cup, so hopefully we have a bit of runway to improve before that comes around.
The Asian Cup. I'd rather hammer a nail through the head of my watch that.
And it's not just about one bad joke. It's about the message that this sends to every girl who dreams of playing football and to the boys who learn to respect the game. 11.5 million people watched the Matildas play England in the Women's World Cup, and it was seen as the biggest TV event in Australian history. Women's football is bigger than ever, but still some people in the media take it as a joke.
Sarah, extraordinary words. It is unfortunately not the only incident. How do you quantify sexism when it comes to women in sports? In your research, you highlight this issue. How endemic is it?
Oh, it's absolutely endemic. But I think we need to understand the difference as well between what sexism is and what misogyny is. So misogyny is fundamentally, and it goes back to the Greek word. Well, the Greek word is actually about somebody who hates women, but it's more than that. It's a belief system, crucially, about upholding the power and the preserve of men. And, someone... at its core, really, it's about protecting male power, male entitlement, and seeing women as less valuable, less capable, less deserving of space and freedom. And we've got to remember that women can also internalize misogyny as a result of living in a patriarchal system. Sexism is the behavior that we see as the result of these misogynistic beliefs. It's the comments that we've just been hearing, the barriers, the unequal pay. And I mean, if you think of it this way, if you think of an iceberg, sexism is what we see at the top of that iceberg. It's the actions that we see, whereas misogyny is the block of ice beneath the surface. It's the belief system that keeps women in a subordinate position. And when it comes to sport, as I said earlier, sport has been set up, run by, designed by men for so long. And this is about upholding that power. It's really the last bastion, especially when we come into sports like football and rugby. And I do want to say there is so many good things that are being done in those spaces, but unfortunately, these attitudes, are still endemic, and we've got to get rid of them. As we were saying earlier, this is all about allowing young girls to be able to dream and to be able to believe that they belong in a space. Every girl deserves to be able to experience the joy of sport ultimately, and not be told that she doesn't belong, because it means so much for her life, not just in that belonging, but what it can give her in all the skills that she can take forward for her future career.
And mentally and health-wise, there's so many elements and benefits to sports, right? Well, also online, a lot of memes make fun of women in sports, or imply that the only sport a woman can do is domestic chores. Well, this mindset is all over social media. Take a look.
Of the Intel Challenge Katowice 2017. We've had a great tournament here.
Well, Usher, I want to go to your reaction to this. Women, they can be the most incredible athletes, and then they're asked about their looks. Their bodies are being spoken about. I was in the research for this show, I was seeing a couple of still photographs that had been taken from footballers, incredible athletic shots, and yet it was highlighted in the context that, people would talk about their body parts, talk about their bodies. Is this something, in the world we live in, is this something that can change?
To be honest with you, it's quite disappointing. I've seen so many athletes, and especially because I know most of them individually, great human beings, incredible people who are just trying to do the things that they love, which is, for example, play football or basketball or run track and field and be involved, in field events, whatever. And when you look at the comment section and people are saying, oh, maybe this person looks like a man, or has very protruding, bonds or whatever. It's just inhuman, actually. It borders, of course, it is disrespectful. And I think that the athletes, are going to have to learn to continue to believe in themselves, but also there has to be engagement with, some of these social media platforms in terms of how they can be punished, the users who use such language, just in the same way that we address racism in general. And I think that we've seen some of the international bodies try to fight against this kind of thing. And this goes for, or this person doesn't put makeup, or this one uses a lot of makeup, this is not a fashion show. And if whatever, color of clothes they choose, it's a problem. I think that at the end of the day, some of these things are changing in terms of the mindset, and some of them, again, can be addressed with, let's have more of sports where women are involved, broadcast on television, so that people really know that this is actually here and women's sports is here to stay. No one is going to stop any of these women from competing globally or even at an amateur level just because someone doesn't think that they should be there. And I see on the screen, obviously, women athletes who are competing in a hijabi. Most of the international organizations have allowed women to wear and express themselves in whatever way they had. We saw at the Women's World Cup in Australia, a Moroccan player who became the first ever to wear a hijabi at that kind of level. We've seen in boxing, we've seen in swimming, women wearing hijabis, being able to, express themselves and compete and just do the thing that they love. So at the end of the day, for me, Stefanie, it's the message is very clear. The women are here to stay. We're not going to be bullied by anyone. And this is where we belong.
Wonderful statement. I think also into what you were saying, there's also a lack of female leadership, according to studies in the sport, looking specifically now at England. In the top 20 sports by participation, only 24% of women were in key roles of CEO, chair, and performance director. Sarah, let me go to you. In terms of the rules and regulations, do these also have these sort of biases ingrained in them? I remember Serena Williams at some point was saying that the umpire during a game, because she was complaining, was reacting to her far more harshly than, for example, other tennis players. I think we all remember John McEnroe and his meltdowns. And she was saying simply that she wasn't being treated in the same way. And I think as women, I think we all have probably personal examples of that. Do you think that still within the rules, within the system, it is something that's ingrained?
Absolutely, it is ingrained, and it all comes down to limiting stereotypes. And as women, we are subjected to those pretty much from birth. We did a study at Women in Sport which looked at this, and we found girls as young as 5 are already starting to feel that they don't belong in sport. And that's down to the messages that they see all around them, they're hearing, whether that be on television, from parents, from peers, and when they go to school. And boys, 5-year-old boys are already starting to feel that girls don't belong in sport. So really, as young as 5 years old, we're starting to see that divide. And coupled with that, the whole boy's identity is really wrapped up on them being good at sport, being strong and being fast. And that whole idea of masculinity is wrapped up in how good they are at sport, which is why we see on the playground girls being pushed aside, because boys are starting to see and with the messages that they're receiving, that they don't believe that girls can help them win in sport. So they won't pass them the ball, whether that's football or basketball, whatever sport they're playing. Girls then tend to get pushed to the sidelines. And these are attitudes that are so pervasive, that start that young, but stay with men and boys and with women and girls throughout their entire lives. And that's why it's so important that at school we build environments where girls and boys can thrive together. This is not women's sport, and the rise of women's sport and the increased visibility of women's sport is not a zero-sum game, and I think that's really important.
Andy Murray, of course, very vocal when it came to female athletes and their role. What for you, Asha, as final thoughts, if you could implement one thing to change women's sports, and also a message to young girls who may face, you're a girl, you don't play football. What is your message to them?
The message to young girls out there is to say you must show up, you must put in the work, and you must earn your place at that high table that you're looking for. It's open, it's for everyone. And yes, you may face challenges, but you have to find a community of people that really can believe in the work that you are doing and that you want to go to. And of course, identify some role models within your society or even far wide. Sometimes you never meet your role models. Get, to understand what it takes to achieve whatever it is that they're trying to get. And of course, follow women in sport.
That's a great message to end on. It went way too fast. So many more things to talk about. Sarah and Usher, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for being part of the conversation. And I'll see you soon.